when you're diagnosed in kind of the middle of your career, right? The middle of what's supposed to be your productive years, it's jolting on so many different levels. And there have been several times where I've gotten very close to somebody and they died, and I said, well, forget this advocacy stuff. I don't want to be connected. But I keep coming back because of the genuine connection.
I hear that a lot through this as a theme, this intentionality that you live with and really focus on being present. I was going to ask about, I mean, I think you've answered a lot of this, just sort of, it's one thing getting diagnosed young with cancer, and then a whole nother, level of this as a stage 4 diagnosis young. I heard you talk about grief is the price of love. And that what you said really resonated. And I'd love to talk about that too.
Sure. Well, I think the average age of breast cancer diagnosis is still 60. And so it's still mostly people who are either retired or heading in that direction. But when you're diagnosed in kind of the middle of your career, right, the middle of what's supposed to be your productive years, it's jolting on so many different levels. And so, I talked about all that time that I had on my hands after things got wrapped up with the firm. And I think that when you have a career versus just a job, that and maybe it's not as much for women as it is for men, but I think a lot of our identity becomes wrapped up in what we do for a living. For me anyway, the idea of advocacy has always been something that permeated my entire life. And so I think I identified with the helping people, advocating for people, that sort of thing is a big part of who I am. And so when you are deprived of that purpose or the thing that gave your life purpose, then you start looking around saying, oh, hey, so what am I supposed to do now? For me, it was a lot of boredom. You can only read so many books and watch so many videos or movies on Netflix. And I very quickly kind of found that sense of restlessness. Now, certainly I was also, had a lot of physical impairments, having to really work at getting mobile and being able to walk better at all. At the beginning, there are cognitive deficits that come about because of chemo. And so a lot of what I struggled to figure out was, okay, I have these expectations of myself. I have this knowledge of myself as a healthy person. What is this now? Like, what can I do now? And so that was where I found my way into patient advocacy, not just advocating for myself, but working with nonprofits to advocate for others in the MBC community. And very quickly found that there is a hole when it comes to the people getting good legal advice. I had great legal advice because all my friends are attorneys, and all I had to do was call up a friend of mine and ask a legal question. But most people don't have that access. And so started to delve into the ability to use my experience and use the things that I had already done to do that, but then still struggling with this adjustment of, I can't think of the word, or I love the spoon theory where we wake up with less energy or less spoons than a healthy person. And we can't just drink a cup of coffee and get more energy. Like, once the energy is gone, it is gone. Like, I would literally sit there and fall asleep sitting talking to somebody. So that's a huge adjustment from being very high functioning. And so I think that those of us who go from, 90 miles an hour career to a cancer diagnosis, that's a much bigger change than those people who are either already retired or, kind of winding down in terms of the things that they're doing. Plus, I have young kids versus people who have adult children. And so I think that the younger breast cancer experience is very different. I think that a lot of hospital systems, survivorship clinics, et cetera, don't often remember that it is very different for us. And so that has been a bone of contention between myself and every single one of my doctors about how the general rule just doesn't apply to me. You can't just make an appointment for me during school pickup because like DCF gets a little upset if I leave my children at school. So, so a lot of that has been something that I've had to educate people about. But then, I think social media has allowed me to connect with other younger women with breast cancer because our experience is so different. We're a minority still, but the under 40 population is the only segment of the population where diagnoses of breast cancer is growing and continuing to grow. In all other segments of age ranges, it's declining. I don't know why that is. I think it's in some ways it's kind of a double-edged sword, but it's kind of good that more of us are educating our doctors because I think they will be more sensitive to our experiences.
One thing I'm also hearing a lot of, Abigail, is the importance of this connection and finding people who are in a similar boat or situation. A lot of, and that was really the main, sort of reason why I wanted to create a platform like this too, is just to take away that first piece of it, because we are not alone, but it's so hard in our own circles to find someone
Yes.
else who is exactly in that, right? For you, if you could just share anything about that, even guidance in terms of finding the people, finding the right support. And then in this space, I think you talked about this whole grief, price of love, what you've had to consider in terms of building relationships and feeling these things. If you could just sort of, talk about all that.
Yeah. Social media has become a really good way of connecting to people that have a similar disease experience. Um, even the people who don't have children, I find that sometimes I can't even connect with them as much. Yes, we can connect on the disease level or on, healthcare experiences, insurance, and that sort of thing. But when it comes to the lived experience, the people who have young kids are probably the people that I end up connecting to the most. And I don't think I've ever met somebody who has been diagnosed with cancer who doesn't have a story of healthy people ghosting us. And what I mean is, when you have somebody who has been in your life in one way or another, you have a serious diagnosis and they do not engage in any way, they completely leave. And over the last 5 years, that's happened to me. It's happened to me with family, where there were people who just couldn't handle things. And I have mostly gotten to the point of understanding and remembering and reminding myself that this is not about me, it's about them. That there are those people who don't have the capacity to enter in to the suffering of somebody else. But I have found over the last 5 years that when we do enter in, when we sit with people, this whole concept of holding space and just being with people, not trying to fix anything, not trying to change anything, just connecting and being with someone else in a space, whether it's virtually or in person, the connections that I have made in the MBC community are the deepest that I've ever had in my entire life. And I mean, people even that I've known for decades, sometimes even more than my husband, because we get each other's suffering on such a deep level. And so, yes, I have continued to be connected to people who don't have cancer, but the vast majority of the people who have stuck around are the people who've been through trauma themselves. There's a sense of, going deep really fast that happens in no other area. But the price of that is that when the people you have gotten that close to and you have connected that much to, when they die because they have a terminal diagnosis like mine, a piece of your heart goes with them. And there have been several times where I've gotten very close to somebody and they died. And I said, well, forget this advocacy stuff. I don't want to be connected. But I keep coming back because of the genuine connection. But there's a connection there that's just like no other connection. And some of these people I've never even met in person, which is a weird thing. And does lead to some of the concept of disenfranchised grief, where it's not normal or mainstream grief, right? We talk a lot about miscarriages or the death of a pet, or or somebody you've never met online that you're grieving for. There aren't great grief rituals in those contexts, right? You can't necessarily go to a funeral and have the expected supports and things that would happen in you lost your parent. And that's something that we talk a lot about just developing grief rituals that help us. And one of mine, let me grab my bowl over here, is the people who I've gotten very close with. I have a rock with their names on them, and I keep it, in my space. And that's part of how I remember them. I mean, I sit down and I decorate a rock after they've passed. We've done a fair amount of grief circles where we get together and we talk about and memorialize that person. I keep close to me the things that people have given me. I have various little notes and a stack of cards that I've gotten from various people who have since passed away. And, every now and again, especially on the anniversary of their deaths, I go back through that and just remember the things that were good about that relationship. Remember the things that I've gotten from that, and remember that connection and that love, because that's what keeps bringing me back to the community. I mean, none of it's easy. None of it is simple. I think everybody has the different things that help them process. One of the things that we're getting ready to do, there's a podcast, Our MBC Life, that is specifically for the MBC community and is created by the MBC community. It's through Share Cancer Support. Every year we have a memorial episode, and everybody calls in to say the names of the people that we've lost in the last year. And it's a very difficult, but a very healing time to really focus on the positive impact, the things that people did that touched us. Those are the things that I want people to remember about me. So, having that as part of just part of the routine, I think is helpful. And I think it's helpful to begin talking about that with my kids.
Again, there's that word intentional, which I really I'm going to take away with me after we talk too. But I'd like to shift a little bit. There's two other sections I'd like to sort of cover, if you will. One is just talking about the different, I know you've talked a lot about genomic testing. I'd like to hit that home a little bit more in talking also about your treatment and, the different, going through scans constantly.
Sure. Yeah. The way that I've learned to look at treatment is that the more information we know, the better the doctors can prescribe the right treatment. And one of the challenges that we had in the first about 4.5 years of my treatment was, because I only had bone mets, it's very difficult to get information about the metastases. So once the cancer, stage 4 is when the cancer has left the original site and gone somewhere else. And so for me, which is pretty typical, I think about 60%, the cancer went from my breast to my bones. And so when you try to get a biopsy of a met that's in a bone, you have to decalcify it before you can actually look at it under the microscope. And that often destroys the cancer, that process of decalcification. So we had not been able to see how the cancer was mutating. So in a metastatic cancer diagnosis, we're basically on treatment until the cancer mutates around the treatment. And so knowing what treatment to be able to target something in the cancer to stop it, to deprive it of fuel. That's why I have the oophorectomy and check out my ovaries, because that's the main source of estrogen. And for those of us with estrogen positive breast cancer, that's typically the strongest receptor. So that's the main thing you want to take away. So the cancer in my body is now resistant to a lot of the hormonal medication because it has learned, because cancer is always learning and mutating around. So testing what we can through liquid biopsies, or now in January, the cancer spread to my liver. So for the first time, we were able to get a MET and look at it and see how it had so fundamentally changed. So unfortunately, cancer treatment is a lot about chasing, not chasing, staying ahead of the cancer, because we don't want to chase the cancer. Once we're chasing it, it's gotten out of control. So we want to control it as much as possible. The good thing for me was that I think going through adriamycin, kind of the big chemo, meant that I could stay on targeted therapy for 4.5 years. So my first line of treatment in 2017 was Ibrance, which was approved by the FDA in 2015. So I was able to be on a medication that had, it had just recently been approved by the FDA, which is huge. And that line, or that class of drugs, the CDK4/6 inhibitors, has really changed the landscape of breast cancer, starting in 2015 with Ibrance, and then there's now a fourth one that's being added to that class. People are living a whole lot longer with far less side effects. So my first line of treatment after I finished chemo was Ibrance and letrozole, and I was able to be on that for 2 years. Very low side effects. Certainly, we had to watch most targeted therapy affect the bone marrow, so we had to watch for low white blood cells or neutropenia. I was always immunocompromised and having to be careful. But the main side effects were the blood counts and some fatigue. But the value, I think, of having gone through the misdiagnosis was that I got the big guns, adriamycin, and then I was able to get 2 years of stability on Ibrance. Then in August of 2019, the cancer mutated, but it was still in my bones. And so we switched to a different targeted therapy, Piqray. And Piqray targets, so Ibrance works by disrupting the CDK4/6 pathway. And that's how cancer grows or can grow. It's a pathway that cancer often uses to grow. Piqray was targeting a very specific mutation called PIK3CA, which is actually present in about 80% of people with breast cancer. So it's a pretty, it's pretty significant. In 2019, it was approved by the FDA in May, and I started it in August. So just I try to have those dates because that is research benefiting people directly. Now, it typically takes about 10 years for medication from concept to actually get in the clinic. Although there are some new ways that drugs can be fast-tracked and things like that have helped. But it takes a long time for medication to get from concept to actually being given to the patient.
Yeah. And I want to pause here because those are already two examples of, hey, just in time FDA approval. And that, we hear a lot about research and fundraising for research. But these are two very, tangible and real, not even tangible. These are just real examples of, I guess, could you talk about that, just feeling like, oh my gosh, it was approved in May. I'm on it in August. Had it not been approved in May, it's a timing issue. There's luck involved in terms of, when all this is happening. And then also sort of, this is where I had to do a lot of learning about clinical trials as well. So what first though, that feeling, you're humanizing what happens when research actually works and happens.
Yeah. No, it's so significant. And research advocacy has been something that I've gotten really involved in. I go to all the big conferences. I think my medical oncologist was a little surprised when I'm like, hi, I'm here at the conference for all the doctors. But it gives me a sense of, it gives me a little bit of a sense of control, which you're so vulnerable and you are so out of control when you are in the healthcare system that having even a little bit, that helps me. It helps me cope with the uncertainty by learning as much as I possibly can about the drugs that are in the pipeline, about what trends are we seeing, and you see that in the big conferences, and where the drug companies are uh, reporting about their data. And one thing that has been a huge part of that is participating in the GRASP poster sessions. GRASP stands for Guiding Scientists and Advocates to Scientific Partnership. And what we do is they pick kind of the big posters or the significant posters. And I'm talking this like an actual poster, like a gigantic thing that's full of words and really, really confusing graphs. And we have these small groups, and it's all on Zoom. But after each of the big conferences, we have these small groups where we talk to the poster author, we have a clinician there, and then we have patient advocates, and we talk about what is happening in the science. Why is this thing important? And so when I went to the big San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium in 2018, December of 2018, that's when PICRE, which I eventually was able to be on, that was like, everybody was all excited about it. At the most recent conference for the American Society of Clinical Oncologists, there was a standing ovation at the news about a medication that just got approved by the FDA recently for treatment of HER2 low, and that first one. And so we're seeing, I have seen in the last 5 years, these drugs that come and that they're the first in their class. They're the first, the first way of identifying and of attacking certain pathways in your body, so that either it's immunotherapy, that we're teaching the body how to attack the cancer, which I think is the future. I think that's the future of precision medicine, that we're teaching our body how to deal with it versus having to stay on this treadmill of medications. Unfortunately, I think breast cancer is too complicated to find a cure, but we are getting so much better at treating different subtypes. People are living so much longer. Like I said, the CDK4/6 inhibitors really changed the landscape. I mean, that's the first line of treatment that everybody gets now, is a CDK4/6 inhibitor almost exclusively. One area where I try to educate people a lot is the only way that we will have more medication is if people participate in trials. And trials are not for the end. It's not for when there's nothing else. I've already participated in 4 trials, and none of them have been about medication. It's all been about improving algorithms to look at liquid biopsies where we can see things in the blood without having to look at a soft tissue met, or actually the very first genomic testing I had, which was looking at the mutations that the cancer had acquired, that was done through a study. And so it's so important that we participate in this research, to be able, or for the scientists to be able to discover and understand things. And the fact that we enroll so few minority populations in these trials means that they're only testing stuff on middle-aged white women. And I am a middle-aged white woman, so I'm happy that they're testing things on something that most likely would work for me. But then how do we know, is it going to work for somebody who's from, the islands, or somebody who's from Africa, or somebody who's from, an Asian country? It's so hard for scientists to be able to tease out all the different specifics about our bodies without having people to test it on.
That's a whole, it's a whole education process that we are going to definitely invest in. But you are proof. You've gone through 4 for different things. And you talked about, so there's the importance of that. Also, just in terms of biomarkers and understanding the difference between genetic testing and genomic testing. And I'm learning in this conversation with you too, how many, how much data can be, retrieved from one test now.
So genetic testing is the stuff that changes in your DNA, right? So what you get from your parents. And obviously you get, half of your copy from mom, half the copy from dad. And so sometimes if there are DNA mutations on both sides, that create something entirely different. And they learn so much all the time. But I do want to say one thing about genetic testing. 23andMe, or color testing, or ancestry.com, that is not genetic testing. That's information that you can get that's available to the public. The genetic testing I'm talking about is through a lab that is FDA approved. And like I said, now the panel is 93 genes that they're looking at that have to do with breast cancer. I'm just talking about breast cancer. There are so many different genes that are associated with all kinds of other things that, I don't have mutations anywhere other than in this ATM gene that has to do with breast cancer, ovarian cancer, prostate cancer, and colorectal cancer. So that's the makeup of your DNA. That doesn't change, right? That's static. But then the cancer, as it mutates, it acquires somatic mutations, and that just means in the body. But genomic testing or tissue, actually with the cancer that they're looking at under the microscope, that gives you the genomic data, and that typically, hopefully, prayerfully, gives you targets. And so I talked about the PIK3CA mutation. That's a target where we have a medication that targets that. One of the things that came up on my recent genomic testing is that I have acquired, or the cancer has acquired, the PDL1 somatic mutation, which is an indication of sensitivity to immunotherapy. And so this is how this is the knowledge that the doctors have to then build out options. And so I always insist for my doctors to give me plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, all the way down the alphabet, because I want to know all the different things. Because when there's the progression, when you have to change medication, if you haven't already selected or pre-selected some options, it's chaos. You're overwhelmed and you're having to make really big decisions. And so I like to make sure that I have, the list ready. One of the things that's happened since I've changed teams, since I moved from Miami to Orlando, is a lot of my new doctors are looking at my treatment plans and saying, oh, you did things very differently. And we did. My doctor and I experimented. So I talked a little bit before about Piqray. And when Piqray, I had a PET scan after I had been on Piqray for about 6 months, where everything was, because all the cancer was becoming more metabolically active, meaning I was about to have a progression. We added a third drug. So I was on Piqray, on Faslodex, which is the hormone suppressor. And then we added Kisqali, which is another CDK4/6 inhibitor similar to Ibrance. There was a study on that particular combination, or an arm of a study on that particular combination, and no one was able to stay on that combination. I was on that combination for 2.5 years. And so you don't know how your body is going to respond until you try. And so I think one thing that I've done in my treatment is just been that I have not been afraid to try something that may or may not work.
I think really quickly, just to pause there, because you talked about Piqray just being, it was not a super easy drug. If we could just quickly go over what was hard about it, and how you were able to figure out any ways around maybe.
Yeah, so hyperglycemia is people mostly associate that with diabetes. Can cause a whole lot of things in your body. And because Piqray, there's a rash that it often causes as well. You have like an allergic response to it. But the hyperglycemia is probably the biggest thing. So into the pricking my finger every day, having to be on medication to manage the hyperglycememia, that is probably the biggest challenge that most people face on Piqray, especially just because hyperglycemia is kind of one of those things that it affects your whole body. It affects everything. Extremely proud to say that I've been working with Novartis, who is the drug company that produces Piqray, on a trial, or I don't think they call it a trial. Anyway, we have a poster coming out at the ASCO session that's coming up, and it's all about teaching the doctors how to manage the hyperglycemia. I'm the only patient advocate on the panel. I think there were 12 or 15 doctors, endocrinologists, medical oncologists, we had a pharmacist. This is probably one of the most amazing things I've ever done, because I brought the patient experience to the table. Plus I moderate a Facebook group for people on Piqray, and we have hundreds of people in the group. So I was able to do some polling of the people in the group, bring some real-time data to these discussions. But this is where patients can help educate, because all the doctors on this panel are all at major academic centers. The vast majority of people being treated for cancer are in rural settings, or not a major academic center. that was such a huge issue for so many patients that the doctors didn't know what to do. That Novartis put their money where their mouth is and invested in coming up with these guidelines that are after discussion and consensus among all the different specialties. So yes, I was very proud to participate in that, and part of it was because I was harassing Novartis about all the things that people were talking about in the group and referring them to the patient advocacy program, and their doctors were trying to figure things out. So I think they finally said, I think we need to give this person a job.
So thank you for talking through the hyperglycemia and that there's work being done to really focus on the quality of life that this is the day-to-day people are living with. It's
Yes.
great that they're effective, drug efficacy, great, we need that. But people don't stay on a lot of these things because if it impedes too much into the day-to-day living, how can someone continue, right?
They can't. Yes, if you have, say, grade 3 diarrhea, which means you're in the bathroom like 10 times a day, if you're only doing that for a couple of days, okay, like you deal with it, maybe take some medication, whatever, and then the rest of the time between treatments is not so bad. The difference with these oral meds is that that's the side effect that you have every day, 24/7 for all the time that you're on the drug. And so I have seen a shift in the last 5 years of researchers really beginning to understand that no, a grade 3 event, which is kind of you start looking at it real closely when it's about grade 3, grade 5 is death. So, just to put it in perspective. And that's the kind of quality of life stuff that I am seeing be much more focused on. Thank God. Not that they didn't want to, but I think that they needed the push and I think they needed incentives. I'm also seeing much more of the patient voice being included in these trials. The piece that I think needs to change is getting the patient advocates involved at the time of the design of the trial, because so many times the trials are designed in such a way as, whether it's transportation or parking or having to be at the doctor 3 times a week, or, there are things that they design that make sense to them from a gathering data perspective, but it's just not livable. And so this idea of having trials where you don't have to go to one place, or you don't have to go to the major academic center, that maybe there's more places, or you can get, say, blood work yourself and bring it, that they're becoming much more aware of, and COVID has helped this too. They're becoming much more aware of, there are things we can relax in terms of the structure that are not meaningful overall, but it means everything to the patient. So that's huge, getting the patients in at the beginning, at the design.
What is your last message to people? I know that you are the ultimate advocate. Not everyone has the attorney background like you do, or is an Enneagram 8 as a challenger. So in terms of, just adapting whatever that means to whoever is watching this, what is that message about? Look, the landscape is changing. And as you had talked about, most people are not going to an academic, research center. And so being able to sort of empower ourselves individually with the right knowledge and understanding. Yeah. What is that message?
So when I was practicing law, I always told my clients, they brought the facts and I brought the law, and we couldn't do the case by ourselves, right? We had to do it together. And so I think that's the thing that I think we all have to look at with our team, is that we're on the team, because our doctors have no idea what's going on at home. They don't live in our bodies. Many of the things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, they had a day or an hour or, a little bit of continuing education about. And so really understanding that when we walk into our doctor's office, we're there to be a partner with them. We need to be an active partner in that. I know that a lot of people feel, and my husband, from being as a minority, as a Black man, he's always more worried than I am about asking questions, speaking up, and challenging the doctors. I obviously have no problem with that. But I think that you don't have to do it in an aggressive or in a challenging type way, although sometimes I get that way with my doctors. But understanding that they don't know what they don't know, that the things, you're an expert in your body, you bring your body to the table, they bring the scientific knowledge plus that experiential art piece, but it doesn't work if you're not telling your doctor what's going on if you're not saying that doesn't work for me. And when they run over you, as so many doctors do, saying, no, 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 that does not work for me. And in our support groups, we often talk to each other about ask your doctor this, ask your doctor that. So I think a secondary thing would be, making friends in the community who can help coach you on the questions that you're not even seeing, can be huge. And there are all kinds of people who, research advocacy is their lifeblood, is their thing. And so not doing this alone, the whole idea of no man is an island, right? We cannot do this thing by ourselves or as just a consumer. We can't just receive what the doctors are saying. We have to be active in that discussion or in that partnership. And I think doctors are getting better about that. They're not always great about that, but they are getting better and understanding that we patients have the same access to clinicaltrials.gov, and we have the same access to the papers and all of that, as long as they're not behind a firewall. That we have access to those things, and we can read and we can bring in things and say, well, hey, what about this? Or I heard this thing in a seminar. So that is what gives me, again, a little bit back of that sense of control, as well as the hope of I'm going to take some responsibility for this, right? This is also on me. It's not just on my doctors in terms of them, figuring out what happens next. I'm going to take some of that responsibility because that makes me feel empowered. That makes me feel more of an active member of the team.